manners, decorum, propriety, niceties, tact. Doesn't this all just sound so much fun? Welcome everyone, Kyron here with the Mere Mortals book reviews, and as you might surmise, this is the podcast where I give travel tips about Italy. No, wrong, of course I'm joking. But there are some travel tips in this book that we have for you today. A Room with a View by E.M. Forster. So E.M. Forster. This is pretty much a classic book, and you do know in this book reviews, we like to dive into the classics. So this was published in 1908, so a good century ago. And it's about 200 pages in length. I don't know, it felt like this book took me a little bit longer than normal to read. I think my reading speed is going down. 200 pages in total, 4.5 hours reading. I'm not sure, maybe even 5 hours. It was a little bit. Synopsis of the book, we have the lovely Miss Honeychurch, Miss Lucy Honeychurch, and she travels to Italy and somewhat kind of like feels trapped with her surroundings by her expectations of society at the time. And this is set in the early 1900s, so Edwardian society. So this comes after the Victorian era. Morals were a little bit looser. People were being able to ride on bicycles for the first time without a chaperone. She does have a chaperone in Italy, Miss Bartlett. And basically while she's there, she gets like a taste of what it is like to have some freedom in her life. And she actually meets a rather exciting young man there named Mr. George Emerson. And they have an interesting contact relationship with each other there. But she has to flee unexpectedly because propriety of tact, of morals, what will the people think, all these sorts of things. So she goes to Rome where she meets another man, Mr. Cecil Vyse, who we see later in the book in part 2, because it's split into 2 parts, one being in Italy and then the second one being back home in England, where she's agreed to marry Mr. Cecil Vyse. And, it looks like a good match on paper, but as we read more and more, we realize maybe this guy is not the right guy for her. So coincidence puts them all back together at the end of the book, and you're like, oh, okay. You might be just simply thinking, oh, this is like a classic lover's tale. Who's she going to decide between mysterious young man she doesn't really know, or this guy who she's kind of, it's a better match on paper, or things like this. But it's actually not that. It's not a love story in the typical sense. It does involve love, but I wouldn't put it as easily as that, where, her having to decide between 2 suitors. I think it's actually a better description as her having to decide between what is expected of her versus what is right. And so this gets, I guess, straight into the themes of the book, the questions, what actually is happening with this girl. And there's many things you could do. You could dive into the nature of love, or perhaps how art expresses the soul. We see a lot of the art, and she's a musician, and we see, in Italy, of all places, there's paintings, there's all these sorts of, just wonderful expressions of the soul. You could perhaps even get into class and cultural differences, but no, what we're going to explore today is the muddle, and maybe a little bit of morals. So many times we see the characters deciding internally that we see them in their own minds being like, Lucy's doing this. What should I say to her to get her to stop doing this, basically? And or what should I advise her on so that she knows how to behave, and forbidding her to do certain things. And for instance, she was expressing a strong hatred or dislike of this man, Mr. Eager, and the others are like, oh, you shouldn't do that, Lucy. It's unladylike, it's improper. So I'm going to jump to page 37 here quickly and read out a little quote, which I think gives a good explanation of just what the times were and things like this. So she was in Italy, and she wanted to get on, explore a little bit for herself. And it comes to this. This she might not attempt. It was unladylike. Why? Why were most big things unladylike? Charlotte had once explained to her why. It was not that ladies were inferior to men. It was that they were different. Their mission was to inspire others to achievement rather than to achieve themselves. Indirectly, by means of tact and a spotless name, a lady could accomplish much. But if she rushed into the fray, herself, she would be first censured, then despised, and finally ignored. Poems had been written to illustrate this point. Pretty much bang on a sentence there of why that, ladies shouldn't be doing certain things, that get despised for it. What would the other people think? And it's always like this other people the nameless mass of expectations. No one can put a finger onto like, well, I don't personally believe this, but everyone else believes this, so you shouldn't do this. And we see it's like, okay, well, there's a little bit, bullshit reasoning. And as we go through the book, we see Lucy's experiences of poor treatment by her family. They intentionally make her do things which will make her sad or angry or that she doesn't want to do. And by her family, friends, fiance, all of them were treating her as if she was a cog that should fit into this machine. Whereas just from the outset, we see so many different things of her. She's a fantastic musician. Ladies are usually not fantastic musicians. This is kind of acceptable, but also like only if she plays the right music in the right scenario, in the right, ambiance and in these parties. And she shouldn't talk about what she saw in Italy, and she should only say these certain things. And it's just like, God, this is so tedious. It's so tiresome. We see a little difference with this with George Emerson, who is her first kind of like lover in a sense. And remember, this is like Edwardian society. So when someone says they're making love to someone, it means like, they had like an indirect contact of the hand or something like this. So it's not the full on intimate relations that we have perhaps nowadays. And there's some all these sorts of things where you could go into like, he also like kind of tells her what to do, but there's differences between giving out advice, i.e. maybe you should think about this. Like he encourages her, for example, to be independent, to bare her soul, to break the conventions, break the norms. But, that's him telling her what to do as well. So, how does this come across? Like, I guess his is usually more a consideration or a suggestion, whereas most other people, it's a statement. You should do this, you shouldn't do that. And funnily, like a lot of tact, i.e. etiquette, i.e. nuance and knowledge is required in helping someone, because you can't just come in and blaze through it and say like, you should do this will help you out. No, it's like you gotta, leading the horse to water rather than, forcing it to drink water. So, tact is required, but in Edwardian society, tact was a strict adherence to arbitrary rules. Whereas nowadays, I would hope to think that tact is more like understanding the particular nuances of a particular person and not trying to enforce yourself on them, but trying to help them and be good to them. And so, unfortunately, she listens to all these people and she gets herself into what is called a muddle. And a muddle is one of these things that come right at the end of the book. I'd almost finished my notes for the book and I only had 10 pages left to go, maybe 12. And we came to this final beautiful scene, which I really loved. And this is where George Emerson's father, Mr. Emerson, he takes her aside and he sees she's about to make a really, really dumb decision. And he comes to this section here. So we see this. She was not, that you are in a muddle. She shook her head. Take an old man's word. There's nothing worse than a muddle in all the world. It is easy to face death and fate and the things that sound so dreadful. It is on my muddles that I look back with horror, on the things that I might have avoided. We can help one another but little. I used to think I could teach young people the whole of life, but I know better now, and all my teaching of George has come down to this. Beware of muddle. Do you remember in that church when you were pretended to be annoyed with me and weren't? Do you remember before when you refused the room with the view? Those were muddles, little but ominous, and I am fearing that you are in one now. And then he goes on to explain, how to live, how to love. And these muddles are these little tiny things where you do the things that you do them because you expect other people to expect you to do them. So in this instance, a room with a view, the title of the book, she refuses a room which has a nice view, which she really wanted, and that the Emersons didn't care about, because now we're going to be under an obligation to them, and I'm a young single woman, and this is not really her, it's Miss Bartlett, her chaperone, who forces this. Now I can't do this because this is going to happen, and I'm pretending to be outraged. Well, I'm not actually outraged, but that is what a girl should be outraged by. It's all this sort of things. And I think, his distillation of wisdom is to avoid this. In my own words, I would phrase it as having the courage to disappoint others, because everyone's always going to have expectations. There's always going to be things in society which may or may not be right. I think personally, for example, that violence is pretty abhorrent, and inflicting it upon other people is abhorrent. If I had gone back to the Spartan times and morals back then and told them violence is bad, they would have laughed at me, and I'd say rightly so, because that was their society, that was the world they lived in, and violence was a kind of like a necessary part of it. But there's always going to be these instances where there'll be expectations, and they will be arbitrary. There'll be just stupid rules which have stuck around for generations, and this is what we used to do back in the day, this sort of thing. And you're not hurting them by flouting these rules or doing something different. There are no real ramifications for your actions. If she had just said, thank you, I would appreciate the room with a view, and just gone with it, that would have been totally fine. Nothing would have happened. It's simply deciding to say the phrase or do the thing, even though someone else is going to be disappointed in you, perhaps. But the thing is, they might not even be disappointed in you based on their own expectations. It's more of society in general, this nameless, formless, shapeless thing, which if no one can really pin down, it makes no sense, but it is still there and still is a consideration. A little personal story here, but reminds me of 10 years ago when I was getting into yoga. I'd done it for about a year and a little bit, and I was telling my dad, I think I might do some yoga teacher training or something like that. I think that could be kind of fun. And this was right as I was about to graduate as an engineer. And I remember my dad looking at me with kind of disdain, or I love my dad. He's an amazing person. But there would be times where he'd brush off something as inconsequential as stupid, and I would feel that. I would feel the disappointment and things like this. And I remember him saying, "But why would you? You can't make much money from it. You're about to be an engineer," something like that. And the funny thing is, now a decade later, I'm kind of coming back to it and being like, you know what? I would be interested in maybe doing some yoga teacher training and giving it a try, seeing what it's like. And so that was one of those times where, perhaps I got myself in a muddle because I wasn't willing to disappoint someone and his expectations or expectations of society, perhaps. And it's pernicious. It's hard to avoid. I think we'll all get into muddles in our lives, and I think it's important to just try and not get into the big ones like Lucy does here, where she is about to make a horrendous decision, which would make her very unhappy for the rest of her life. And those sort of the muddles, those are the ones you really got to watch out for and make sure they don't compound and really affect your life. Let's jump on, I suppose, to the author, maybe some extra details. Edward M. Forster, I can't remember his middle name, born in 1879, a fair while ago. He lived quite a long life as well. I think he made it to the 1970. So 91 years, something like that. Good on him. And he lived through this Edwardian period, and himself was, I suppose, the character of Lucy Honeychurch. It was kind of him, to be honest. He's an interesting man because I believe he was gay, and so in those periods, of course, being homosexual was definitely a no-no. And he struggled with his sexuality. He struggled with fitting into what society expected of him. He felt all of these things himself, and he traveled to Italy. Even this book he struggled to create because he wanted to make it a comedy, i.e. something with an uplifting ending, and we do see an uplifting ending. But he didn't want to end it with marriage of, the girl marries the right guy and they live happily ever after. And he really struggles with contending with that, but whilst also trying to write a book which is fascinating, which does have a plot which does make sense. Because he was, this was one of the times I read the introduction after I'd finished the book, because you'll see why, because I actually quite liked the book and I wanted to know a little bit more. And we see he was debating with, killing off a character randomly just so that he could have, kind of the Deus Ex Machina type thing. And it was I'm really glad he didn't do that. It would have totally ruined the ending. There's only one other thing I really wanted to take from this. And once again, it highlights why I like this book so much. And so we're jumping here onto page 72, 73. And basically, Lucy's had, basically a kiss with this guy. And her chaperone found out, and they're now like having to leave. But now the chaperone, Miss Bartlett, she's feeling guilty because she's there to make sure this type of behavior, these sorts of things don't happen. And so Lucy was going to tell her mum and be like, Mum, this happened. And Miss Bartlett's like, well, maybe we don't have to tell her. If we just keep it a secret between you and I, everything will be good. And the reason she did this was just because she didn't want to get into trouble. And so we come to this little portion here. A shamefaced world of precautions and barriers which may avert evil, but which do not seem to bring good, if we may judge those from who have used them most. Lucy was suffering from the most grievous wrong which this world has yet discovered. Diplomatic advantage had been taken of her sincerity, of her craving for sympathy and love. Such a wrong is not easily forgotten. Never again did she expose herself without due consideration and precaution against rebuff, and such a wrong may react disastrously upon the soul. Man, the passages like that are what I love about reading. And you just hear it here and on the book reviews, and you're like, Karen, it's not that good. But the whole lead up to it, the 72 pages leading up to this, made that a poignant, like hard-hitting truth. You go, oh shit, damn son, you're right. The grievous wrong of being taken advantage of from your sincerity is heartbreaking. It's one of the worst things that can happen to a person. And it's another strong argument, I suppose, getting into the questions and themes again as to why you perhaps shouldn't put too much weight on others' opinions and their expectations, because the polite society, for example, are full of prejudice and rudeness. And we look at the characters in this book who most resemble this Edwardian etiquette of all those things I listed at the start: manners, decorum, morals, tact, niceties, propriety. And we see these are the worst people. These are the rudest people. These are the prim and proper chaperone, Miss Bartlett. She's a gossip. She breaks her word of keeping the secret. Cecil, her Mr. Vyse, her kind of like, amazing, well-established fiancé. He's a shallow prude who's rather ignorant of his own ignorance. And so he's haughty. He makes fun of other people. He's capricious. He pulls like nasty tricks on people just to satisfy his own, like revenge, I guess. I don't know what you'd even call it. The Mr. Eager, one of the church people, forgotten their name, starts with a P. Parsons. He's just like an absolute arsehole. Just a complete arsehole. Makes unfound accusations, casting stones in glass houses, all these sorts of things. All of this is just like, damn, what? Okay, all right, these are the people to be emulated. These are the people who are doing the things right. And then you look at the weirdos, the outsiders, the independent people, and they're the ones who are kind to everyone. They're the ones who are not spilling secrets. They're the ones who are doing the right things. And yeah, it's interesting going through that and being like, okay, all right, I kind of see what's going on here. Obviously, this book was written with that independent frame of mind, so it's very much what he's trying to expose. And you could write a book of the opposite sort where it's, I'm actually trying to think of a book where it's the prim and proper etiquette people who are the good ones, and the independent, kind of like outside the system people who are the bad ones. None are coming to mind. Might have to research that a bit more, which will get us on to our last summary here, similar books recommendations. A good book for me is one that raises interesting questions, and in particular has powerful passages. Those three things I read out, I'll talk about the quotes a little bit more, but I don't really want to do them as much. But I kind of felt like I had to read them out because they hit me in places where I went, damn, son. So I feel this book does this quite nicely, superbly, in fact. And the only problems I really had with the book were subtracting a couple of points just for the language. It is a little bit, I wouldn't say dense, but yeah, it's kind of hard to pass at times. And I don't know if this is due to just the prevailing conventions of the language at the time. Language changes, and, perhaps he himself, Mr. Forster, the writer, the author, fell into the trap of writing to expectations of the time, i.e. you don't talk about sex, for example. You don't mention rude words. There certainly wasn't any rude words in this book, or even goddamn or hell or anything like that. So we could maybe say like, oh, he himself has fell into the trap of sticking to conventions and etiquette. Or we could just say, this is just how they spoke 100 years ago. They used different words. They didn't use and as much. They probably weren't saying like. There was probably all sorts of things they were doing. But it would be ironic if he fell into the trap of sticking to conventions. Character development feels a little lacking at times. I probably would have said if he'd added an extra 30 pages or so just to fill out some of these characters, it probably would have been better. Maybe a little bit less time on the actual scenery and describing that. I didn't get as much joy from that as I did the actual characters themselves. And the love between her and George, it goes pretty quickly. It's pretty rapid. That was one of those times where I'm like, a little bit of disbelief creeping in here that she would make big decisions either way, of either deciding to marry him or to flee or whatever else other options she had available to her. It seems pretty dramatic considering the FaceTime between the two of them is so minimal. An interesting book, nonetheless. There were plenty of additional notes that I wanted to fit in here and I couldn't do, so that's actually going to be in the next Mere Mortals episode about morals and where they come from, how they're judged upon, are they society-wide ones, things like that. So check out the Mere Mortals in a week's time. And overall, I'm going to give this book a very, very solid 7.5 out of 10. E.M. Forster's A Room with a View. If you want other books that are like this, that deal with similar themes, we've done plenty on this book reviews, or at least I have. Test of the D'Urbervilles by Thomas Hardy, A Portrait of a Lady by Henry James, My Brilliant Career, Miles Franklin, The Age of Innocence, Edith Wharton, Madame Bovary, Gustave Flaubert. There you go. There's a whole bunch of ones there. If you're interested of reading some of them, jump into them. Let's go into the V for V section. And this is where I just want to thank some people who have helped support the show or sent in interesting messages or just provided some feedback to the show. And man, did I get a doozy this week. And this is it was such a random one because it was on he sent it to my own Facebook, my personal one. And this was from Vratislav Kapisek. Definitely mispronouncing that. Vratislav, I'm pretty sure of the first name, or moderately sure. And he says, "Hello mate, I just want to say that I love your podcast and book reviews. They make my mornings and daily commutes actually enjoyable, and I learn a bunch of things along the way. I also appreciate your focus on classic works of literature, which seem to be neglected by most podcast producers." I would agree with that. I've gone through a lot of podcasts, book reviews, and they don't go into the classics much. I think that's part of the business model. They need the new authors. They need to sell stuff. It is also one of the rare instances of podcasts which have a clear structure and are easy to follow even whilst doing other tasks, so I do not have the time. I almost have no social media accounts and did not know where and how to connect with you apart from this platform. In the last episode, you asked for recommendations and thoughts, and I'm particularly happy about the fact, not particularly happy about the fact that the episodes tend to be shorter on average now, although I absolutely understand that most listeners won't stay for the whole thing. I believe they should be arranged 20 to 35-ish minutes, depending on the themes and heaviness of the material. Moreover, I would recommend keeping the classic literature and occasionally adding something contemporary in order to balance the choice for all kinds of audiences. I also appreciate that you always provide a summary of a given work, which makes the subsequent analysis much clearer. I definitely would not want to change that. Thanks for your fantastic work. No, Radislav, thank you for your kind message. That made my day, man. I one of the best messages I've ever received in my life, to be honest. It was that kind of feedback is so invaluable. I can't express, not only because he hit all the points which I was asking about in terms of, should I keep a summary? How long should I make these things? Knowing what he wants is definitely going to shape of how I do things. So I will just say the balance is tending towards going back to longer book reviews. What I actually really want to do, so for example, this one's already at like 25 minutes, I think, and I've still got another couple of minutes to go. But what I really want to do is keep it to a tight 25 minutes. If you listened to ones from, let's just say, 6 months ago, there was a lot of waffle at the start. There was a lot of talking about extra things. I was talking about the live. I was talking about this. If you notice this one, I get into the synopsis pretty damn quick. So I want to just make everything tighter, put it all together, and just really make it solid. And I think I can make that so it'll still have the same amount of themes, questions, things like that popping up. But I'm just trying to make the whole product nicer. So thank you so much for that, my friend. The only question now is regarding quotes. He said he wasn't particularly enthused with them when Cole was doing them, and I'm moving away from that anyway, so that's cool. Maybe one or two to draw attention to the particular theme. That's kind of what I did for this one, to be honest. So that's probably still the one thing I want to know. Do people find the quotes useful or not? I would really, really love to know that. Reach out via any of the social links that are down below, or you can reach out to me personally on Facebook like Vratislav has done here. So value for value, that's all I ask for. I put all this effort out to you free of charge, and I just ask that you return it in some shape or form. You can do it like Vratislav or like Juan and Johnny have done by appearing in the live that we do. Pastors, thank you, Juan. That's what I wanted to say, pastors. And and you can also give some feedback, like the talent, like Vratislav has done there. Suggestions on how to improve these book reviews are much appreciated. And then if you want to support us, there is a PayPal link down in the show notes, which you can send that into, and I will definitely read those messages out. And thank you for help supporting the show, because it does cost time, money, energy to create all of these things. So doing that is much appreciated. Last little note here. I'm live here on Thursdays, 10 a.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time. I had to switch it up a little bit earlier today. Sorry, partly due to sickness, partly due to going to the hospital to see my mum. So I'm going to, they're going to switch anyway in about a month's time, because I'll be going to Brazil. And so I don't know what's going to happen. We'll figure it out when I'm there. So at least for the next month, I've got that there. Join us on the YouTube is probably the easiest ways to do it. Or you can also do it via a podcasting app, because we are live on them. If you're unsure about that, meremortalspodcast.com/support, and that'll give you the recommendations of which apps you can use, because Apple and Spotify don't support live, because they're not great apps, to be honest. You're missing out if you're only on them. I saw Johnny here says, my days off are getting switched starting next week, so I'm going to miss the live streams. No! But I will watch when I get home. It's been so much fun chatting afterwards. I hope you have an amazing trip. Thank you, Johnny. Hopefully it'll work out when I travel, where it'll work out. But yeah, no, appreciate you joining in as well. And this makes the world to me, having this feedback, having these interactions with Vratislav, Johnny, Juan in the chat is really fun. So we're going to leave it there for today. Thank you everyone for joining me. What have we got coming up? Probably the next one is Yukio Mishima's Confessions of a Mask. I do want to do A Room of One's Own, differentiated from A Room with a View, A Room of One's Own by Virginia Woolf. The Innocents Abroad, it will happen, but probably in about a month's time, and I'll fit one more in apart from those three before I go, and then we'll probably have a whole bunch from one for a little bit as I'm getting set up. So that's it. Thank you everyone for joining. Hope you're having a fantastic day wherever you are in the world with your reading as well. Encourage you to read all of these books, and we'll leave it there. Ciao for now. Karen out. Bye.